We're here to idea everyone, to fire up your curiosity and connect you with the people and ideas that shape our world. Watch, listen, understand, connect, create. Let's move the human story forward together.
Hello and welcome to The Poetry of Science, a podcast which provides insight into new scientific research via the medium of poetry. I'm your host, Dr. Sam Illingworth, and each week I'll be introducing you to some of the latest scientific findings and sharing a selection of science-themed poetry. After all, we could all do with a little bit more poetry in our lives. In this episode, I'll be exploring new research which has found that 370,000 Californians rely on drinking water that is polluted, with communities of colour disproportionately affected. Swirling underground, invisible toxins leach into view, potent cocktails of mismanaged waste that ebb and drift and flow into wells that hide in plain sight from the regulations and rights of less domestic communities. Communities of water left to rot as filthy liquid spews its translucency across streets once alive with colour. This poem is inspired by recent research published in the American Journal of Public Health, which has found that many Californians rely on drinking water with average contaminant concentrations at or above regulatory standards. Since 2012, access to safe, clean and affordable drinking water has been recognised as a human right in the state of California. However, many California community water systems do not meet regulatory standards. This issue is exacerbated by the fact that approximately 1.3 million Californians, nearly 3.5% of the population, receive their tap water from private domestic wells that remain largely unregulated, with the majority of these households being located in rural areas. In this new study, researchers focused on testing 3 chemical contaminants: arsenic, nitrate, and hexavalent chromium, all of which are highly toxic to humans. The researchers combined data on the state's community water systems, domestic well permits, and census results to locate those Californian households that were most likely to be served by unregulated domestic wells. They then used measurements of drinking water and groundwater contamination throughout the state to estimate contaminant levels for those served by both community water systems and domestic wells. Of the estimated 370,000 Californians whose water supply was found to likely contain high concentrations of the 3 chemical contaminants, more than 150,000 are served by domestic wells. Furthermore, places with a higher proportion of people of colour experienced greater levels of drinking water contamination than any other regions in the state. In order to help address this inequality and to help policymakers and members of the public look up where their water comes from, researchers from this study have also developed an online drinking water tool which provides maps showing where groundwater sources are likely contaminated with unsafe levels of the contaminants. Unfortunately, given that this study was limited to measuring only arsenic, nitrate and hexavalent chromium, it is likely that the actual number of Californians impacted by unsafe drinking water from other compounds, and for which data are not as widely available, is far higher. Now that you've heard the science, let me read the poem to you again. Swirling underground, invisible toxins leach into view, potent cocktails of mismanaged waste that ebb and drift and flow into wells that hide in plain sight from the regulations and rights of less domestic communities. Communities of water left to rot as filthy liquid spews its translucency across streets once alive with colour. In this section of the podcast, I like to share a poem written by another poet on a topic related to the science that has been discussed so far. In this episode, I'll be reading Water by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson was an American essayist, lecturer, poet, and philosopher. Born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1803, Emerson was one of the most influential writers and thinkers of the 19th century in the United States. While Emerson is best known for his essays and philosophical treatises, he also published several collections and anthologies of poetry, and by the end of his life, Emerson had produced at least 64 translations of other poems. Emerson died in 1882 in Concord, Massachusetts, at the age of 78. Water by Ralph Waldo Emerson. The water understands civilization well. It wets my foot, but prettily. It chills my life, but wittily. It is not disconcerted, it is not broken-hearted. Well used, it decketh joy. Adorneth, doubleth joy. Ill used, it will destroy. In perfect time and measure, with a face of golden pleasure, elegantly destroy. Thank you for listening to the Poetry of Science.
Thank you very much for being with us for this episode of the ideaXme show. ideaXme is a global platform. Our mission is to move the human story forward by sharing knowledge of the future. You can find us on all major audio networks at www.radioideaXme.com, on YouTube and Vimeo. Please subscribe.